Hello everyone, today is April 29th, 2026, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, The Political Report. So for today's topic, I wanted to cover the 2026 California gubernatorial election. Specifically, I wanted to cover their nonpartisan blanket primary system that's going to be occurring in June 2nd of 2026, where California is one of the uniquely special states in the entire country that does not have a partisan primary system. Instead, they have a nonpartisan top two primary election. This means that candidates of all political parties, whether it be the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, and any candidate who vies as independent will show up on the exact same primary ballot if they have enough polling numbers and signatures to show up on the ballot. Now, who are the candidates in this race? The main frontrunner candidates that's currently in the race is Xavier Becerra, that is the former Secretary of Health and Human Services and the former Attorney General, the AG of California from 2017 to 2021. You also have Matt Mahan, who's the mayor of San Jose. You have former U.S. representative from the state of California from their 47th congressional district, Katie Porter, who was also the second place nominee for the Democratic Party in 2024 for their U.S. Senate election, where she just ran short of Democrat Adam Schiff. Alongside her, you have Tom Steyer, founder of Farallon Capital, a former hedge fund owner, and candidate for president in 2020. Then you have Tony, who is the superintendent of public instruction in the state of California. And finally, for the Democrats, you also have Antonio, the former mayor of Los Angeles from 2005 to 2013, and a former speaker of the California State Assembly, all running for the Democratic side of the primary election, despite it not being a partisan primary election. Those are the candidates that the Democrats have on their side. Whereas on the Republican side, you only have two front candidates that actually have ballot access. That being Riverside County Sheriff Coroner Chad Bianco and Steve Hilton, the former advisor to UK Prime Minister David Cameron and current political commentator. Leaving this to be a somewhat interesting primary where there's two Republicans facing off against a multitude of Democrats here. Out of all of the candidates, there are really only 4 Democrats who have a chance at the frontrunner and 2 Republicans, the ones I just mentioned. As you can see here, a few weeks ago, around April 22nd, 2026, California actually had their primary debates where 4 Democrats and the 2 top Republicans were invited to all have a discussion for around 1 hour long about their policy positions and which candidate should make it out of the nonpartisan primary system and make it to the November general election ballot. At the debate, because there were 6 candidates, none of them really had a pull-away moment. The time was somewhat evenly divided among all 6 candidates, but none of them really stood out or had a chance to shine, making this race still up for grabs for anyone here. This did not always used to be the case. If you go all the way back to the beginning of the polling numbers for the 2025 gubernatorial primary election, you can actually see that there was a very, very early frontrunner in the race. You can see here on the list on Wikipedia, there was a handful of Democrats, in addition to the ones I just listed, who were running but have since withdrawn. But if you go all the way to the beginning of 2025, right after Trump's inauguration, it was very clear that Democrat Katie Porter was actually in the lead. You can see in the polling here, she started off as a favorite within every single top 2 primary poll at 12%, 15%, 16%, 15%, all the way up to 21% and then back to 15%. However, all of this changed when she faced a political scandal of her own. It began to be reported in late 2025 that Katie Porter had verbally abused a lot of her staffers in a leaked Zoom call video, where Katie Porter can be seen screaming at and cursing at her own staffers that she's paying, treating them poorly on video, in which the staffers decided to leak the video to the media that really painted Katie Porter in a bad light. Since then, Katie Porter has also had some of her personal life show up in the scandals, where filings of divorce between her previous ex-husband ended up coming out, where it also showed that she was potentially physically and verbally abusive to him at times in their marriage. All of this sort of crashed Katie Porter's momentum in the race, where she was going from a top 2 candidate to shortly after the scandals, she was nowhere to be seen even within the top 3 or 4 of the candidates. Now, with that being said, who took Katie Porter's place as the frontrunner? Shortly after Katie Porter began to lose a lot of the momentum, Democrat U.S. Representative Eric Swalwell announced his candidacy for the race. Now, Eric Swalwell was a former U.S. House of Representatives member from the state of California, representing both the 14th and 15th district, and he's been in Congress for nearly a decade and a half. Swalwell has previously ran for president all the way back in 2020, where he was at the Democratic primaries debates alongside Joe Biden, arguing for his chance to be president of the United States, before he ended up dropping out because of poor polling numbers when he ran for president, and also because of a scandal where he actually had a relationship with a Chinese spy called Fang Fang, where in his very early stages of San Francisco politics, since at least 2012, he's been actively contacting and on and off relationships with the Chinese spy Fang Fang, who was trying to get in touch with a lot of local California politicians to push Chinese interests. Now, Axios reported the article, and a lot of the news ended up breaking out around the 2020 primary, and alongside his poor polling numbers, he ended up dropping out of the 2020 presidential primary. But when he announced his bid for the 2026 gubernatorial election, you can see that he was polling at the very high numbers, all the way at 18%, 13, 16, and 17%, showing up as the top 2 or the top 3 candidate in the nonpartisan blanket primary race. Now, all of this changed as of around a month ago, where multiple women have come out to a lot of these media and news agencies companies describing their sexual misconduct experiences with Representative Eric Swalwell, with a few of them actually accusing him of multiple crimes, such as him drugging them at a bar before they ended up dating him, alongside multiple other sexual misconduct crimes, including sexual assault here that you can see in this article. A lot of this was a coordinated effort by a lot of his survivors, where they all came to the media and ended up reporting their stories on the front page of these news organizations such as CNN, who covered the story. Upon this, a lot more accusers ended up coming out and ended up working with local and federal prosecutors to begin a criminal complaint inquiry against Swalwell, because a lot of the things that they accused him of were crimes at the state and the federal level, in which several investigations have been opened, specifically one in Manhattan, where the district attorney's office began looking into and investigating Representative Swalwell. Now, when all of this news came out, Eric Swalwell actually ended up dropping his bid for the California governor's race after the sexual misconduct allegation showed up in the public eye. With him dropping out of the race, you can see that the race actually began to get a lot more competitive, and Eric Swalwell lost his spot as the frontrunner. You can see here that at the beginning of April, before the scandal broke out, that he was polling in the top 2 of 18%, but after the scandal began to be reported in mid-April, the polls began to show Tom Steyer taking the lead. You can see here that Survey USA polled Tom Steyer at 21%, Impact Research then polled him at 16%, and he continued to lead in the top 2 to top 3 results for a lot of polls, all the way up until the end of April here, where he ended off with 15%, where he has 16% in the Create Strategies poll. Not only did Swalwell drop out of the gubernatorial race, but he actually ended up resigning from his entire seat in the U.S. House of Representatives as well because of the scandal and criminal investigation. Moving on from Swalwell, you can see that a lot of the Democrats ended up increasing their polling numbers shortly after he dropped out. Katie Porter actually saw a bump in her numbers alongside Tom Steyer, but the one who surprisingly benefited the most from Swalwell dropping out was Xavier Becerra, where he began to poll in double digits for the first time in mid-April after Swalwell's resignation and dropping out. You can see that he went from single digits all the way to 10%, 13%, 10%, to now being at around 15 and 23%, possibly being seen as a Democratic frontrunner in this primary. Now, as time goes on, you can see that even more Democrats are deciding to withdraw this race, where Bethy Yee, polling at 1 to 3%, ended up withdrawing from the race and instead endorsed Tom Steyer, who is polling at 14%, being one of the other Democratic options here. And as time goes on, I believe you will see more and more Democrats withdraw from the race and begin to endorse another candidate instead, as it becomes clear that they stand no chance of winning the primary. Now, with that being said, I feel that this race is really going to be a four-way race between the 2 Republicans, Steve Hilton, Chad Bianco, and the 2 Democrats, Tom Steyer and Xavier Becerra. And the reasoning behind that is that Matt Mahan is only at single digits alongside Tony and Antonio, where combined they probably poll at less than 10%. Whereas the only 5 candidates left in the double digits would be Katie Porter, Tom Steyer, Xavier Becerra, Chad Bianco, and Steve Hilton. However, because of the scandal that Katie Porter has had, I feel as though she won't be the one getting the endorsement from these Democrats once they drop out. I feel as though Katie Porter will probably end up being around 5th place, with the main race being a two-way race between the 2 Democrats and a two-way race between the 2 Republicans. I think that Tom Steyer would actually end up becoming the nominee, as Xavier Becerra's momentum is completely manufactured from Eric Swalwell dropping out, and not really from his own campaign picking up the steam. Almost all of his numbers came from previous Swalwell supporters. And finally, the reason I think Tom Steyer will end up pulling out ahead is because he is a multi-billionaire. As previously mentioned, Tom Steyer was the former founder of Farallon Capital and is a multi-billionaire hedge fund owner. Alongside this, he was previously a 2020 presidential candidate, where you can actually see back in 2020 he was a lot more moderate. At the 2020 presidential primary debates, in his campaign, he has adamantly made his position known that he is opposed to Medicare for all and free healthcare for everyone, which in a modern-day Democratic primary is a death sentence for any Democrat trying to vie in a politically progressive and a politically leftist state such as California. Since then, Tom Steyer has been full damage control mode, where he began to walk back nearly all of his moderate previous statements. As you can see here in December 2025, when he was about to announce his bid, he actually reversed his position, saying that the entire time Bernie Sanders was right and that he is in favor of free healthcare for everyone and Medicare for all. Alongside this, Tom Steyer has also completely changed his stances on immigration, where in 2026, he began to state that his policy position on immigration, where he stated that he wants to abolish ICE and destroy the entire department. Additionally, he stated that he would draft legislation to end racial profiling and to allow the state attorney general to criminally prosecute and imprison ICE agents and their leadership, investing in California's immigration legal defense infrastructure and educating immigrants on their rights. So you can see here that since the 2020 Democratic primary, Tom Steyer has done a complete 180 in nearly all of his political positions and beliefs, which makes sense when you look at a state like California, where they are one of the most left-leaning and progressive states in the entire country. Now, a lot of Democrats notice this, because if you know anything about the modern-day Democratic Party, enemy number one for them are these multi-billionaire candidates, where a lot of Democrats, even back in 2025 for the Proposition 40 ballot initiative, were mad that Tom Steyer was fueling their entire campaign and felt as though it's wrong for a multi-billionaire to be cash rolling and funding the entire Democrat apparatus in the state of California. So Tom Steyer is sort of like a rock in a hard place, where he is this multi-billionaire who's had success as a former hedge fund manager, but he's also running in the state of California, so he needs to adopt the most progressive and left-wing policies as possible if he wants to stand a chance and make up for the fact that he's a multi-billionaire in the eyes of these young and progressive voters in California. So where do things stand in this race? As I previously said at the beginning of the video, the debate really didn't have any winners. If you went back to look at the polling right before Swalwell dropped out, you can actually see that there's been a couple of doomsday scenarios for the Democrats, where the top two candidates to advance from the primary were actually the two Republicans, Chad Bianco and Steve Hilton. Now, this doomsday scenario has happened multiple times in California, where you can see that only the top two candidates advance to the general election. Now, most of the time it has been Democrats, however, because it's such a Democrat state. You can even go back to the 2018 U.S. Senate election in California, where it was actually two Democrats who made it to the top of the ticket, because Republicans ended up splitting their votes so much with around 10 to 13 candidates that it was two Democrats that ended up taking the lead in the primary, subsequently showing up on the front of the general election for their ballot. So where do things currently stand in the 2026 California gubernatorial election? Well, there's not that much time left between now and June 2nd. As you can see, there's a little bit over a month left, so these candidates are really in the final stretch of their election. Even as these Democrats begin to drop out, you can see that some of them are remaining on the ballot. You can see that Eric Swalwell dropped out after the ballot deadline for him to be removed from the ballot. So any Democrat who ends up dropping out would still probably deceive a few of the less educated Democrats, where you can see here Eric Swalwell is still showing up in the polls and showing up in the numbers despite him not even running for the race anymore. So there is a scenario where a few of the Democrats put a few percentage points into these candidates who are no longer in the race to begin with. However, back to my prediction that I gave a little bit earlier in the video. I see this race going to a general election between Republican Steve Hilton and Democrat Tom Steyer. The reasoning behind this is, once again, that Steve Hilton will probably coalesce the Republican base. Steve Hilton received a Trump endorsement, which is vital for Republicans in the state of California, and Tom Steyer is a multi-billionaire. At the end of the day, he has more than enough money to out-fundraise this final home stretch of the election. And as anticipated, I believe that multiple Democrats will end up dropping out, and all of these undecided voters would probably end up leading toward Tom Steyer. This is also supported by all of the polling aggregates. You can see here that between 270 to win, Decision Desk HQ, Race to the White House, and Real Clear Politics, that in all of the polling aggregates, the winners from the primary is Republican Steve Hilton and Democrat Tom Steyer, and I think with only 1 month left in the election, that these will be the results that we get from the primary. alongside those two winners, we do have 12% undecided, where I think most of these undecideds are Democrats who just have not made up their mind yet, and presumably will divide their votes evenly, if not fall behind Tom Steyer. So at the current moment, I would have to agree, and I see those two candidates advancing to the general election. With that being said, everyone, this closes out my video. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you all see Steve Hilton and Tom Steyer making it out to the general election ballot in November? Or do you think another Democrat will end up beating out Tom Steyer and showing up on a November ballot? I think that for the Republicans, it pretty much is a consensus that Steve Hilton will be the nominee showing up in the November ballot, but the Democrats are still in a bit of a closer position. So please go ahead and let me know down in the comments what you all think. Besides that, I'm also taking video suggestions in the comments down below. So if there is a topic, if there is a race, or if there's political news that you want me to cover in my next video, go ahead and leave it down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to go down below and leave a like, and subscribe if you have not already. I will be dropping more videos later this week, so make sure to stay tuned. Thank you all, and I'll see you guys in the next video.